Carol Burnett appeared to love everyone she worked with, but she couldn't forget one co-star who went too far. This person's behavior became unpleasant during the 7th season of her popular show. In front of the entire cast, they degraded the guest stars. Things became physical when Carol attempted to stop it. Everyone on set was surprised by what transpired next. Despite their years of dating, this co-star's treachery really wounded her. You will be shocked to learn who it was. The birthdate of Carol Burnett was April 26, 1933. In a dilapidated San Antonio hospital. There was not even an address on her birth certificate. Her parents already suffered greatly from drinking. Both were drinking daily by the time she reached 4. Her mother was frequently violent in her outbursts. Carol would duck beneath mattresses to avoid the yelling. Her parents wouldn't provide meals, so neighbors did it. In retrospect, Carol referred to it as survival rather than childhood. She recalled feeling lonely all the time. According to statistics, children from such households don't often flee, but Carol did. The marriage of her parents was short-lived. When she was just 2 years old, her father left. The divorce was finalized by 6 o'clock. The court placed the blame on negligence and intoxication. Some of the proceedings were attended by Carol. It made her feel invisible, she subsequently recalled. Her mother remained resentful. After relocating to Los Angeles, her father continued to drink. Nevertheless, I somehow learned to pay attention to everything. That helped her create characters that seemed authentic on stage years later. Carol and her half-sister Chrissy were transferred to live with their grandma following the divorce. They found themselves in a dilapidated boarding house in Hollywood, in a small room without a window. The weekly rent was $9. They shared a bathtub with other residents down the hall. At night, mice scampered over the floor. Her grandmother's $30 monthly Social Security benefits were their only source of income. Carol used broken furniture to make toys. She read books that other people had discarded. Just to feel happy, she went to free radio tapings. According to Los Angeles County, 7% of children were deemed neglected in 1941. Carol could have been one of them, no doubt. Something odd occurred when she was 8 years old. Karen is a twin sister that Carol made up. Karen had flawless dimples and curling blonde hair. After changing her clothes behind the building, Carol would dash out the front door and return as Karen. She continued this for over 2 years. On one occasion, she even asked Karen to a birthday celebration. Her grandma received a letter from a neighbor indicating that she needed assistance. However, it was Carol's first attempt at improvisation. She was not a storyteller. She played them out. That was the start of something more significant. She was rehearsing her Tarzan shout on the rooftop by 9 o'clock. She shouted till the neighbors ran, mimicking the jungle call from old movies. Police even occasionally appeared. She continued. Her voice grew louder over time. Her lungs expanded. Years later, when Tarzan was called out by her fans during her performance, she was able to do it without missing a beat. It had begun as a means of escape. It turned becoming her signature. It continued to yell despite survival. When they went to the cinema, her grandmother had a tendency. She would steal toilet paper from the theater restroom and tuck it into her purse after the movie. They were unable to purchase their own. Carol never forgot those times. She would laugh about it years later. It wasn't hilarious at the time, though. It was the reason they continued. Film was more than just a means of escape. They were school to Carol. She would sit through double features for a dime. She observed the timing, the performers, and the flow of the scenes. She listened to the audience's response. Those gloomy theaters served as the foundation for her subsequent comedy. She drew directly from those early recollections when she mimicked Gone with the Wind on her show. She learned everything from those movie theaters. There were peaceful moments in their tiny kitchen when they listened to music. Her grandmother was a pianist. On sometimes, her mother would play the ukulele. You Are My Sunshine was one of the songs they sung. It didn't matter how impoverished they were on such evenings. It was around that kitchen table that Carol learned to harmonize. She felt more comfortable singing in front of people as a result. That idea would develop into her well-known musical sketches. She would never forget that one moment. She expressed her desire to become an actor to her mother. "You can always write," her mother remarked, glancing at her. "Regardless of your appearance." God, it hurt. Carol recalled the exact words. She became aware at that very time that her own mother didn't think she was attractive. However, it propelled her rather than shattering her. Her career demonstrated that skill was more important than beauty. She provided those who didn't fit the mold a voice. Her father was barely making it by the early 1950s. He had lost everything to alcohol. In order to pursue her goal, Carol moved to New York in 1954. Her father passed away shortly after, at the age of 47. His liver had failed. Carol claimed that he was simply lost and never harsh. His life was already over, while hers was only beginning. Carol Burnett was a UCLA junior in 1954 and had no idea what the future might bring. Her lecturer abruptly canceled her final theater exam while she was getting ready for it. He urged her and a few classmates to act out skits at a party for other faculty members in lieu of an exam. It didn't feel so much like a present as a joke. Carol had been fretting over her money and if she would ever have a chance to pursue acting professionally. However, that unplanned evening altered everything. On the spot, she came up with a humorous sketch and gave it in front of a group of academics. They weren't courteous when they laughed. It was authentic. She witnessed individuals in positions of authority react to her humor for the first time. She was unaware that someone in the throng had been observing her intently. Carol did something embarrassing after the performance that she would later laugh about. Quietly, she started stuffing cookies into her purse. She was not being avaricious. All she was feeling was hunger. She wanted to give her grandmother something because she frequently struggled to eat. An elderly man in a suit approached her as she was finishing the last few biscuits. She stopped. She was afraid he would reprimand her or force her to leave, but instead he praised her performance and struck up a discussion. She didn't even realize she had the key to a door until that awkward moment over cookies. He was a rich shipbuilder from La Jolla, and the deal he made was almost too good to be true. He loaned $1,000 to Carol and her acquaintance Don Soroyan. Only one catch, no interest. They had to use the funds to travel to New York and pursue their aspirations. It would be close to $12,000 in today's currency. It changed the course of two impoverished students' lives. Carol never disclosed the identity of this individual, who made no public requests for recognition or gratitude. However, Carol's career was built on his act of kindness. 3 criteria were present. First, there was a 5-year repayment deadline. Second, his identity must always be kept a mystery. Third, they had to support other up-and-coming musicians in the same manner if they became successful. Carol accepted the offer without question. Only a handshake and a promise were made, there was no contract. She also never broke it. Exactly 5 years later, she reimbursed him. She kept his identity a secret. After succeeding, she gave back to struggling performers in a covert manner by giving them scholarships and presents. The ripple from that one cookie-related talk never ended. Carol and Don took use of the money in a way that most people would consider stupid. They left UCLA. The year was 1954. Women packed their bags and rode the train to New York, even though it was not expected of them to drop out of school to pursue careers in show business. They lived in a tiny apartment, ate inexpensive food, and paid for auditions and rent with the loan. The struggle went on for years. But just 4 years later, in 1959, Carol got the part that would make her famous. In the Broadway production of Once Upon a Mattress, she portrayed Princess Winifred. After beginning in a modest off-Broadway theater, the musical was so popular that it was brought to Broadway. Carol gave a heartfelt, bold, and humorous performance. Even though she was only 26, her name was all over the place. She remained with the show for its 470 performance run and received a Tony nomination. She would play the part on television years later, solidifying it as one of her favorite roles. She fulfilled all of her commitments by the time she gave back the $1,000 in 1959. She made a note of the precise date the loan was due. She found the man who had been the first to believe in her. He grinned, returned the money, and vanished once more. Carol also kept the remainder of the agreement. She made careful to help others the way he helped her, and she never revealed his name. Beneath her notoriety, its story reveals the subtle theme that permeates her whole career. She started appearing on The Gary Moore Show that same year. A weekly variety show, it was recorded at CBS Studio 50. The Ed Sullivan Theater is its current name. Carol, who was only 26, was on stage with comedy and music veterans. However, she quickly established herself as the star. Her breadth was demonstrated in her sketching, particularly in her portrayal of a cleaning woman. Depending on the situation, she could be loud, silent, silly, or depressed. It lasted until 1962. Carol also developed the muscles she would later flaunt on her own show during those years. She also met one of her greatest colleagues and future husband, producer Joe Hamilton. She received her first Emmy Award in 1962, marking the final acknowledgement of her talent. She was awarded for her exceptional performance in a musical or variety show. It wasn't her first significant honor. It was an indication that the comedy industry finally recognized her as a leader. By that time, her name was starting to appear in American homes, and she had been in hundreds of sketches. An incredible run began with that Emmy. She received 7 Emmys out of 25 nominations by 2024. But the most important one was the first one. It demonstrated to her that taking chances and remaining loyal to her beliefs may truly pay off. Carol and Julie Andrews collaborated on a renowned special in 1962 as well. More than 17 million people saw Julie and Carol at Carnegie Hall when it debuted in June. It combined sketch humor, parody, and music. There was an incredible chemistry between the two women. Executives at the time didn't think the special would succeed, but it quickly gained popularity. It took home 2 Emmys. One for Carol and one for the performance. It was the first time that many fans saw Carol as more than just a sketch comedy. She was capable of acting, singing, and competing on a national level. Not only did the performance increase her visibility, she rose to the top of the entertainment industry as a result. On December 15, 1955, Carol Burnett and Don Saroyan were married. She was only 22. Long before her face was recognizable on TV, they had first met in college 3 years prior. Burnett was still having financial difficulties in New York at the time, working as a hat check girl and accepting any job she could find to make ends meet. Saroyan was attempting to pursue a career in acting as well, but neither had discovered a clear route. In the shadow of tiny apartments and unpaid debts, their marriage developed. Burnett's life didn't drastically change until 1962, when Julie and Carol at Carnegie Hall was shown and won an Emmy. Their marriage terminated that same year. Her career was barely getting off the ground when they finalized their divorce on September 25. It was a division that illustrated how peace isn't necessarily the path to success. She married Joe Hamilton, a television producer who had worked on her Carnegie Hall special, just a few months later on May 4, 1963. There were elements of a love story and a Hollywood merger in their connection. On the same day that he married Burnett in Mexico, Hamilton terminated his previous marriage, which had produced 8 children. They would have 3 daughters together, making 11 children in the home. The house was constantly bustling with activity, voices, and schedules. Later on, Burnett would characterize those years as both happy and hectic. She was the cool, humorous host in public. At home, she was balancing scripts and costumes while managing crowded dinner tables and consecutive school functions. The laughing was actually the result of constant work. On December 5, 1963, Carrie, their first daughter, was born. Following on January 18, 1967, was Jody. Then, on August 14, 1968, Aaron showed up. However, not every pregnancy ended happily. Burnett miscarried at just 9 weeks in early 1965. Even as her star continued to rise, she kept that anguish to herself. However, the most profound heartbreak occurred far later. From the age of 13, Carrie battled addiction. Burnett lost her in 2002 after years of attempting to assist her in her recuperation. Carrie passed away at the age of 38 from pneumonia caused by cancer. Frequently, the public just witnessed the humor. They missed the hospital stays, the restless nights, and the subsequent silent sadness. Joe Hamilton was more than simply her spouse. The Carol Burnett Show, which began in 1967, was produced by him. In TV history, that program would go on to become one of the most important comic variety shows. However, Hamilton was juggling a family of 11 children while establishing that accomplishment. Breakfast turmoil was the start of mornings. Production meetings concluded the evenings. Year after year, the strain grew. And they split up after over 20 years of marriage. In 1984, their divorce was finalized. The reality of their artistic collaboration was one of heartbreak, emotional weariness, and deadline pressure. Their tale demonstrated how there are significant trade-offs in even the most prosperous lives. Burnett had accepted whatever roles that came her way before to her breakthrough. She appeared on the Paul Winchell and Jerry Mahoney Show in 1955 as the girlfriend of a ventriloquist dummy. In an episode of The Twilight Zone in 1962, she portrayed a guardian angel who was intended to be a pilot but never took off. In between, she competed on early game shows like Pantomime Quiz and played Buddy Hackett's uncomfortable girlfriend on Stanley. Although these moments were strange and perhaps unmemorable, they gradually enhanced her reputation. Her 1962 program appeared to be an overnight triumph when it finally aired, but it had taken almost 10 years of odd performances and little moments to get there. After the events of September 11, 1967, everything changed. Burnett was not allowed to have her own variety show on CBS. Instead, they recommended Here's Agnes, a generic sitcom. However, a provision in her previous contract allowed Burnett to produce one season of any program she desired. Just in time, she turned it on. Over the course of 11 years, 279 episodes of The Carol Burnett Show were broadcast. It became a television landmark and was shot at Studio 33 in CBS Television City. It was the first time a woman hosted a primetime variety show. Burnett defied convention, established the norm, and never looked back. The start of the show was unexpected. Burnett would leave to answer audience questions. This was an accident. She was once sent out early as a joke by a producer. However, it became a regular fixture because the public adored it. People demanded to hear her famed Tarzan roar, inquired about her career, and asked her favorite co-stars. Few TV shows ever succeeded in establishing a sense of intimacy like Burnett's charming and honest response. She continues the tradition in her live performances to this day. Those spontaneous occurrences turned into some of her career's most memorable moments. She developed characters that existed outside of the television in addition to performing. The charwoman, a silent cleaner with a mop and a dream, was there. Next up was Eunice, the obnoxious, irate daughter from the family sketches who went on to appear in Mama's Family, her own television program. The face of Burnett was as expressive as the equipment used by any comedian. In a split second, she could transform it into joy, surprise, or grief. The extent of her humor was demonstrated by parodies of well-known movies like Went with the Wind. People weren't merely amused by these sketches. They helped to define what humor on TV could be. Then came the prizes. Out of 70 nominations, the show took home 25 Primetime Emmys over its 11 seasons. It took home 3 awards for Outstanding Variety Series. There aren't many shows in history that have received that much praise. The Golden Globes named a Lifetime Achievement Award after Burnett because she became so famous. It was a rare honor for her to receive it while she was still alive. During acceptance speeches, Tim Conway and Harvey Korman, 2 of her cast members, frequently stole the show with spontaneous antics that made it difficult to distinguish between acting and real life. Their onstage performances were memorable, poignant, and humorous. Burnett, however, never worked in solitude. She picked her cast wisely. On the Danny Kaye show, Harvey Korman had already shown his worth. One of Burnett's most powerful performers was Vicki Lawrence, a teenager who wrote her a fan letter. Tim Conway, a former guest, became a full-time member in 1975, while Lyle Waggoner, who had previously tried out for Batman, became the show's announcer in Straight Man. He gained notoriety for using well-timed pauses and stumbles to prolong sketching. They created TV magic together. Even now, their chemistry is being researched. Their drawings are still used in classes and tributes. On the Carol Burnett program, Harvey Korman had always been a dominant figure, but by the 7th season, he had transformed. Suddenly his moods started to change. The anxiety was evident to everyone on set, including the guest stars. It was Petula Clark and Tim Conway that week. Mid-rehearsal, Conway, who always made the room happier, was cut down. Without making an effort to conceal it, Korman dubbed one of his doodles dumb. Clark hardly received a courteous greeting. As Korman practiced with both of them, he muttered something nasty under his breath, which made matters worse. Despite the show's reputation for warmth and humor, the atmosphere became chilly during those scenes. Known for her elegance and gentleness, Carol Burnett ultimately had enough. She told Harvey that his actions were inappropriate as soon as she entered his changing room. She didn't shout. She wasn't offensive. She was firm, though. She was surprised by the outburst of rage she received in return. She was warned to keep out of Harvey's affairs. After the show that night, he even declared that he would like to resign. He closed the door after violently pushing her into the hallway when she attempted to resist. Carol gasped. They have collaborated for many years. She was greatly shaken by that incident. Conflict was not something Carol liked. It had always eluded her. She needed strength now, though. So she put herself in another person's shoes. She imagined herself as Barbara Stanwyck and Joan Crawford. Unbreakable, sharp, and tough. She got up and headed back to his door, not hesitating this time, keeping their sounds in her mind. I've already called his agent, she informed Korman. He lost his job. He was not going to return. At first, Harvey didn't think she was real. However, he realized it was genuine when he saw her eyes and heard her calm voice. He briefly lost the will to fight. He started to feel the consequences of his actions, including his tantrums, his coldness, and the opportunities he had lost to be kind. All of it suddenly caught up with him. And he apologized at that very time. He requested one more opportunity, 1 week, and a complete week of tapings and rehearsals without any outbursts. Carol agreed, but only if he maintained his good mood throughout. And he did. He fulfilled his pledge. They remained close for the remainder of his life, not just that week, but until the show's run ended. Carol Burnett does not recall the slamming doors or the shouting after Harvey Korman died in 2008. She recalled the subsequent friendship. She thought that confrontation preserved the program as a whole in addition to their relationship. Carol Burnett has her own struggles behind the scenes. At the age of 13, Carrie, her oldest daughter, began using narcotics. It wasn't a silent battle. Carrie made every effort. Cocaine, heroin, marijuana, alcohol, and quaaludes. She was already in her third rehab by the age of 15. Despite Carol and Joe Hamilton's best efforts, nothing seemed to be working. The press learned about it in 1979. It was dubbed Carol Burnett's Nightmare by People magazine. It didn't make the news. It was the reality. Those years, according to Carol, were like walking through fire with no way out. However, Carrie managed to survive somehow. She washed up. She spent over 12 years sober. She went to schools. She talked about addiction with others. She made a road out of her suffering for others to follow. Those hardships had a toll on them. After being wed in 1963, Carol and Joe Hamilton started to grow apart. They were living alone by 1982. They were pushed to the limit by the strain of Carrie's addiction and the never-ending work hours. Carol had always made an effort to improve the situation without starting a fight. However, there was no simple solution this time. They got divorced in 1984. Their once successful and creative marriage ended, adding more heartbreak to an already long list. Joe Hamilton passed away in 1991, 7 years later. He was only 62. His head and neck were affected by the malignancy. Alongside Carol, the man who helped create television history passed away quietly at home. They have maintained communication despite the divorce, particularly with the children. Behind the scenes, Joe had been a mastermind. 5 Emmys were won out of 20 nominations. However, his last years were characterized by sickness, divorce, addiction, and personal tragedy. Both his family and the television industry were devastated by his passing. Then the biggest blow of all arrived. The death of Carrie Hamilton occurred on January 20, 2002. She was just 38. Cancer set in after years of hope and sobriety. Her brain was affected when it started in her lungs. A case of pneumonia developed. The girl who had found her voice and overcome addiction vanished in an instant. Carrie and her mother were working on a Broadway play at the time. The name was Hollywood Arms. She continued to write despite her declining health. She continued to dream. Later, Carol remarked that losing Carrie was like having her heart sliced in two. She said, however, that Carrie's strength and her decision to fight, heal, and create stayed with her every day. Years before the disease, in 1988, the mother and daughter had embarked on an unexpected voyage. They traveled to Moscow. They had a clear objective: assist in starting the Soviet Union's first anonymous group for alcoholics. There were more than 4 million registered alcoholics in the nation at the time. The majority were unaware of AA. Hours were spent by Carrie and Carol taking calls from folks who had nowhere else to go. More than 90 million people watched Carol's movie, Life of the Party, on Soviet TV. The revolution was calm. Still in the early stages of her recuperation, Carrie assured the callers that they were not alone. Once molded by suffering, her voice has now become a lifeline for strangers everywhere. 2 of the most popular comedic artists on television gradually drifted apart in the early 1980s. Vicki Lawrence and Carol Burnett had laughed together on TV for years. They appeared to have an unbreakable kinship. But something changed when Mama's Family became its own show. Carol had recently gone through a difficult divorce from Joe Hamilton, who had been her husband and producer of Mama's Family and The Carol Burnett Show. It wasn't only a marriage that ended with that split. It drew emotional boundaries that nobody anticipated. Withdrew from the program and everyone associated with it, including Vicki. Eunice, a character Burnett developed, was essential in the series' beginning. However, she disappeared from the set following the divorce. No subsequent episodes featured her. Vicki's own narrative claims that their quiet wasn't fleeting. Vicki's continuation of the series upset Carol. Hamilton is now in charge. The program entered syndication. Carol stayed away, and Vicki stuck with it. Once a close friendship, it became chilly. Burnett, who used to visit the set frequently, was now only a memory. The fans were perplexed. The loss was felt by the actors. Vicki found herself in an odd situation where she was devoted to her job yet cut off from a buddy she greatly liked. Carol made her choice based on more than one show. Everything was at stake. She virtually left Hollywood when the divorce was made public on October 22, 1982. She relocated to Maui. She stayed out of the spotlight. People who had collaborated with her for years were isolated. Vicki subsequently stated that she had divorced everyone who had any involvement with him. And she was one of them. It hurt that much. Carol didn't say anything for years. She refused to publicly respond to inquiries about her. The wound remained open. The first indications of recovery didn't appear until after Joe Hamilton's death in 1991. A simple phone call was one of the most poignant moments during that stillness. The phone rang while Vicki was preparing dinner. It was taken up by her kid. Carol was there, but she was unwilling to speak to Vicki. She requested to talk to Al Schultz, her husband. Vicky was astonished as she stood there. "Does she want to talk to me?" she asked her son. And the response was no. She carried that memory with her for years. Al informed Vicky of Carol's remarks after taking the call. "I swear I'll return. I swear." But that promise would not materialize for a long time. Wrapped in her own suffering, Carol avoided others for years. Still feeling the pain of that moment, Vicky attempted to move on. However, things might change with time. And it did in the end. Carol and Vicky gradually started getting back in touch after Hamilton's passing. The gap narrowed. The warmth came back. By 2023, they were close and not just talking again. According to Vicky, they were actually closer than we had ever been. When they got back again for Apple TV Plus, Palm Royale, she remarked it felt like coming full circle. Not only was their friendship re-established, it was strengthened. Vicky revealed that over the years, Carol had taught her a lot. Teachings on effort, enjoyment, and perseverance in the face of failure. "I'll be back," that old phone promise had finally materialized. Carol Burnett has made a spectacular comeback to television. She has played parts that most performers her age wouldn't dare take on at the age of 91. She appeared in the last season of Better Call Saul in 2022. One of the main factors in Saul Goodman's demise was her character, Marion. She was not a sentimental guest star. She played a key role in the narrative. She then returned to comedy in 2024, as Norma Delacourt in Palm Royale, where she easily held her own in scenes with younger celebrities. She responded, "It's simple," when asked why she continues to work. She wants to enjoy herself. It is still the same spirit that illuminated living rooms for decades. And she doesn't intend to quit until the work ceases to be enjoyable.